Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor-based, so all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com.
Brett Ender, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate you. The studio's amazing. House is great. Love South Florida, so it couldn't be better.
It's so good to have you here. When's the last time we saw each other? Was it at White Oak?
It was, we had you on, we've had you on the Meat Mafia podcast, our show, twice. So I think it was the second time, which was, I think that was December of 2022 was the last time I saw you in person.
Yeah. That was at White Oak?
That was in Bitcoin Park.
Oh, Bitcoin Park. That's right. Okay.
Yeah. I think we were both at the Beef Initiative conference at White Oak, like September of that year.
Yeah.
And then I saw you a few months later.
Right. Yeah. So I remember, because we were talking about the last time I was on your show, it's when I had just moved to Nashville. I think I just arrived literally a few days and had shared some of my story on your podcast, the Meat Mafia podcast. And it was so cool because then a doctor that listens to your show reached out about something I had shared, and she recommended a piece of equipment to me. And that piece of equipment is what I use to meditate every morning, and it helps me deal with my autoimmune condition. And just one of those cool things about social media, how you start to share certain things about yourself and you find people in the community that are willing to help you.
Definitely. Yeah, there's almost like 2 parts to that. Like part 1 was you being vulnerable and opening to admitting the thing that you were struggling with. And then the second part is like, I'm always just continually amazed who is listening to the show that you might not know about. And so that woman was like our mutual friend, Dr. Mary Kerr. She's a board certified MD and functional medical specialist out of Dallas, Texas. And she was like, hey, I noticed that Robert was experiencing this with his autoimmunity, recommend him to buy this. I'll talk to him. And it's like just making that connection, you feel way better. Like that's the power of the internet if you use it the right way. It's incredible.
And she's become like a friend now. Like I text with her about things and ask her questions about stuff that's going on. She's always been super helpful and very friendly. So yeah, it's, so tell me then how you, because we were talking about this a little bit offline, but you used to be in a more traditional work environment, I guess the traditional corporate ladder, but you decided to go onto the entrepreneurial path and start the Meat Mafia podcast and a few other things that you're working on. So where did the fork in the road occur for you, and what gave you the balls to take the path less taken?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I feel like you have moments like this where you kind of appreciate the journey that you've been on. I said to you off camera, you know, I've been a fan of your work for probably 4 years. I listened to your podcast for the first time in March or April of 2020. And now even just us being friends and you being willing to interview me, I think it's a cool testament to what you can build out in a few years when you really follow the mission that God has on your life. But for me, there was always this kind of like underlying theme of health and nutrition that I was passionate about. And it really, for me, stemmed out of a time of crisis. So I went to a small school up in Boston called Babson College. It was an entrepreneurial school. It's where I met Harry, who I co-host the Meat Mafia podcast with. And going into my senior year of college, I started noticing that I didn't feel as healthy as I should, which was surprising to me because I was a high-level baseball player. So probably similar to you when you were younger, it was just like calories in, calories out, right? Everything I'm doing is under the lens of I'm an athlete, therefore I'm healthy. So a lot of alcohol, a lot of stress, playing a highly competitive sport, a ton of processed food. I couldn't cook anything. And the summer of 2016, I was working an internship at a financial services company in New York City. And so I would commute from my parents' house in New Jersey into New York City. And I was noticing on that 2-hour commute, my urgency to go to the bathroom was like getting more and more severe. And I was 21. So right as a 21-year-old guy, you're not going to tell anyone about that. And you're stupid. You're young. You think you're invincible. You're like, it'll just correct on its own. Well, for me, it didn't. And the symptoms continue to get worse and worse the entire summer. So flash forward, this started in June. By August, I was literally shitting blood 20 plus times a day.
Jeez.
I had lost 30 pounds. The last day of my internship, I got rushed to the hospital, got a colonoscopy, and then immediately got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. Wow. And so for anyone that doesn't know what ulcerative colitis is, it's a form of irritable bowel disease. It's basically severe inflammation in your large intestine, which is your colon. Crohn's is very similar. That's your small intestine, but kind of similar. There are some differences, but there are a lot of similarities. And the thing with these autoimmune diseases that have really exploded over the last 50 years, which I'm sure we'll dig into today, is that they tell you that the diseases are incurable. So they immediately get you on a cocktail of medications, steroids, biologic drugs, et cetera, because there's a fear that you will eventually go back into a flare-up. So you have to be on the drugs for the rest of your life. I got put on a ton of prednisone. I got put on 3 different medications outside of that. And the big one being Remicade. The medical term for Remicade is infliximab. And it's a biologic drug. It's an immunosuppressant. And the cost of that drug per year is $150,000. I was on that drug for 5 years. So you see what I cost the medical system, let alone the millions of other people that are on Remicade, which there are millions of people on these drugs, right? And so I just kind of accepted the diagnosis that my doctor had given me. The other interesting thing about my diagnosis is that my doctor told me that it was not diet and lifestyle related. He told me that I had basically a genetic predisposition to getting UC. And so no matter what I did, this outcome was essentially inevitable, let alone you and I just talking about all the things that I was doing in college that I know were the root cause of why I got sick. And then my life really changed in 2019 where I was working a tech sales job in New York City. And I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast, and I listened to a podcast that Dr. Sean Baker had gone on, who's, I call him basically the godfather of the carnivore movement.
Actually, he's coming here this week too. That's the other guy.
That'll be a good test to see who's bigger, you or Sean. He might have you by like an inch.
He's a little bigger than me.
He's a moose. He's a great Bitcoiner too. Amazing guy, by the way. But so he, on this podcast, his theory was that, number one, animal products are wrongly demonized. They're actually the most nutritious foods that you can be eating, and they're also the most bioavailable, which means your body can actually absorb them. It's good for your gut health. And the kicker for me was that he was saying on this podcast that there were thousands of people that he was seeing that had incurable autoimmune diseases similar to IBD that were getting off their medication as a result of this diet. And so for me, when I'm 24, I don't want to be relying on getting this ridiculous drug literally injected via blood infusion every 8 weeks. Right? At that point, you know, my hope was, I felt good, but I just had very low hope that I was going to get off this drug. And here's someone that's actually encouraging me and telling me something different than what my doctors are telling me. And I just kind of had this light bulb moment where I flipped the switch and I said, why not try and heal? There's really there's no worse outcome than what I've experienced before. And I was living on 57th Street on the Upper East Side of the city. There was a Whole Foods 2 streets away. And I remember going to that Whole Foods, buying ribeyes, ground beef, chicken, beef tallow, butter, bone broth, good quality spring water, and a little bit of black coffee. So I wasn't 100% carnivore because I still drank coffee. And I just cooked all my meals and I did exactly what he told me to do. And I'm not kidding, literally within a week, my stomach already felt way better. Like I was probably going to the bathroom 4 to 5 times a day. I got down to 1 to 2, which for me was life-changing. Because when you're in a flare-up, like your life becomes revolved around where's the closest toilet. Right. Yeah. Like I went on a date with a girl when I was 21, and I think I went to the bathroom 4 times, and she thought I was like doing cocaine because I'm going to the bathroom that much. You know what I mean?
Terrible.
But so immediately I saw the effects of that. So this burning inflammation, the sensation went away, bowel movements were way better. My skin got better. I was like popping out of bed with like this vim and energy and like tenacity for life. And you know, when you don't have that feeling and when you gain that feeling back, especially as a man, it's so life-changing.
Oh yeah.
And then I just went deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, man, and just like started learning about regenerative agriculture and sourcing my food and connecting with local farmers and deep diving what went wrong with the food system. And, you know, flash forward a few years, this was 2021. I got another colonoscopy because when you have ulcerative colitis, you have an increased risk of getting colon cancer. So they kind of have to go under the hood and just make sure your inflammatory markers are really good. So doctor goes in there. Not only did I have 0 inflammation in my gut, I had 0 microinflammation.
Wow.
So he didn't tell me this, but that's the definition of being medically cured.
Yeah.
And he got me off of all the drugs and medication that I was on, which it literally never happens.
And how long was that period?
That was about 2 years of very strict carnivore eating and tinkering and experimentation.
That's incredible. Did you give up coffee too in that period?
So I never fully gave it up, but I was drinking like high quality organic and mold free coffee.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've noticed this with some of your gut issues, but like when I drink a higher quality espresso, my stomach feels good. But I know certain people, like they just have, they're so severe, they have to just give it up.
I just fully gave it up because I was having, and it was Paul Saladino that got me to give it up. I had given up so many things. I'd been eating just beef and salt for a long period of time, but I couldn't quit coffee. Coffee was like, it's my everything, you know, it's what got me to work, got me out of bed, the whole thing. And so he finally was just like, look, dude, you're drinking hot bean juice every day. Your gut's just not going to heal until you cut the coffee. I was drinking cold brew, but he was saying, you know, this is very aggravating to the gut. There's no, like, you can do all the other things. You're just eating beef and salt. You've eliminated everything. But if you don't cut the coffee, you're not going to get the results. So finally, I cut coffee. That was the hardest thing ever, by the way. It was like week 1, I was exhausted. Week 2, I was sad. Felt like I like lost a friend or something. I was like emotionally like upset, actually. And then week 3, you start to come back online. Like you have really good energy. But that, and now I just do green tea. I've never gone back to coffee. Like I miss it in a way. I miss the taste. I miss the ritual, but I feel much better without it. Like I actually have much higher energy without it.
Yes.
So you stuck to the carnivore diet for 2 years, but you never gave up coffee, and you were still able to heal.
And I was still able to heal.
Wow.
And some people are so severe autoimmune, and in your use case, you just had to give it up.
Yeah.
I wasn't overdoing it. I was probably drinking like 2 cups a day. And some days I would go without it, but I would say 90% of the days I was still drinking it.
Yeah.
But for me, for whatever reason, I just needed to just reincorporate a lot of these nutrients. And that for me with the inflammation was still enough to like mitigate that inflammation and be able to get off a lot of these drugs and medications that I was taking.
Yeah. How did you deal with, so one of the most difficult things for me, my journey is quite a bit different actually. I discovered Bitcoin first and through Bitcoin discovered Carnivory. And by this point I had already tried veganism and a lot of other things. And I knew enough that keto worked for me. But I guess I heard it initially from Saifedean, who also relies on the work of people like Sean Baker, Paul Saladino, et cetera, to talk about these crazy people that just eat red meat exclusively. And, you know, the first thing you think when you hear that after being brainwashed by American, quote unquote science is like, oh, you're gonna have a heart attack in 2 weeks, right? You can't eat that much red meat. But when I got that permission, basically, I was like, oh, no, you can eat meat and you won't die. Then I started to really lean into it. And that's when I started to heal. My issues weren't as severe as yours. Mine was more, you know, I had diagnosed with lichen planus, autoimmune, but that was just a cosmetic issue. It didn't really cause me any issues physiologically, but I had like inflammation in my lower right abdominal quadrant. And that was causing me to have like skin issues, joint pain, irritability, all of these things. And it would be triggered by food. Like if it would flare up, then I would feel like shit, my joints would hurt, etc. And then when I would eat the right things, which was basically no carbs, it would go down. And so I started doing all of that. So it was like Bitcoin, Carnivory. Then I started healing the gut. You took a different path, it sounds like. You discovered Carnivory first, started to heal yourself. And then where did you go from there? Was it podcast then Bitcoin, or was it Bitcoin then podcast? Like, what was the sequence?
That's a good question. I remember when you came on the show for the second time, the moment that I always remember is you said beef is Bitcoin and Bitcoin is beef, which I think is the perfect analogy. And I am a little bit backwards to the most of the Bitcoin community, where it seems like most people follow your pattern of Bitcoin, then Carnivory, where I was Carnivory, then Bitcoin. I was fortunate because, I have a great business partner and co-host, and Harry, he was big into the Bitcoin space. And one of the things that I noticed is when I finally decided to make that jump, when I was working my corporate job, and I finally had that moment of like, I just want to help other people heal and just share some of my learnings around the food system, very similar to you with your learnings around currency and what is money. The people that gravitated towards my stuff the most from the first post that I ever made was the Bitcoin community. Yeah. And I was like, that's very interesting. What does that say about them as people, that they're truth seekers? That was what kept coming back in my mind. And then getting to connect with the Saifedeens of the world, you being in Austin and getting to connect with people like Parker Lewis and Will Cole and a lot of these Bitcoin OGs, that really made me have that light bulb moment around what I thought currency was. And I would even I would say the analogy is like, if you're selling your 401k to throw all that money into Bitcoin, that's almost the equivalent of what people would say, like giving up processed foods and vegetables for a carnivore diet, because it gets a very similar reaction. Yes. But it's like the source of truth of what you should be doing.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Fiat food is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but there does seem to be this connection. And, there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but so the government very heavily subsidizes the corn and sugar industries, for instance. So, a subsidy is, the state is stealing purchasing power from people via taxation and inflation, and then it's redirecting some of that purchasing power into certain favored industries. And so it's no surprise that basically everything on the shelves has corn syrup in it, sugar in it, et cetera. So there is this connection, right? It's like, well, you have a system that's, when we say fiat, basically means like by decree, right? Do this because I said so, or there will be consequences. When you have a system based on that, you get these very weird outcomes in really any area of life that money touches, which turns out to be most of them. So you get a currency that's being forcibly depreciated, and all of a sudden the food starts to become depreciated. And I'm sure you've been into the seed oil rabbit hole, of course. Basically, every food with a label, mostly, has seed oils in it. Yes. Right? Most foods that don't need to have sugar in them, in American grocery stores at least, have sugar or high fructose corn syrup in them. Yeah. And you get in this situation where you can't, even if you're trying to eat healthy. Like, we were at Whole Foods the other day, and my girlfriend picks up dried cranberries, and it just says organic dried cranberries. First of all, it was like $14. I was like, what? How is this $14? Then you read the back of the label, and it's organic dried cranberries sprayed with canola oil, some other, like, what? It's like, what? These are just dried. Can't it just be dried fruit? Like, why do you have to put all this 100%. Stuff on? So you come to this point where it's like it feels like, the feeling for me is like you're navigating a minefield.
Yes. And
you literally have to take the time and attention and effort to examine everything, the ingredient label in everything that you put into your body. And that process was so excruciating. And I had to learn through countless rounds of trial and error, where you start to eat really strict and you start to feel a little better. I don't know if your journey was like this. I was like, I would eat really strict. Yeah. I'd start to feel a little better. And then I'm like, oh, I'm good. I can just eat I feel good now. I eat something and I feel bad again. I'm like, oh, what did I do? Like, where did I misstep? And so I kept learning, repeating this pattern. And then finally, I started to actually really get serious. Like, everything that goes into my body. And it's been so difficult. It's like difficult psychologically. But I don't know, if you don't take control of your own health and if you don't do these things to feel better, because when I went to the doctors, like sort of like you, I'm like, hey, I feel this certain way. They run the test. And for me, they actually said, oh no, you're good. You don't have anything. I had the autoimmune condition, which they could diagnose, but it was just cosmetic. And they told me about autoimmune. I said, we don't know where it comes from. There's no cure for it. There's nothing we can do about it. So it's like, you just have to live with it now. And I was like, this is what a terrible answer. Like, how are you a doctor? Like, there's no way you don't know where this comes from. And I don't know. I guess if I try to look at it as like, what did I learn from it all? It's like that you have to take control over yourself and your own life. You have to be responsible for your own situation. You can't abdicate that responsibility to a doctor and expect them to have an answer for you. And so anyways, it was just very brutal in that way. Did you go through this kind of looping cycle where you would start to feel better and then maybe eat some other foods again that bothered you? And like, what was your day to day like? Did it take you a while to normalize yourself to this diet, or?
It's such a good question. And the way that you likened the processed food industry to a minefield, I think is actually the perfect analogy. Even this concept of food addiction, right? It's like we recognize pornography addiction, alcohol addiction, gambling addiction, but food addiction is something that we talk about a little bit, but I think traditional medical fields don't really recognize it as an addiction, where you take a company like Coca-Cola and their distribution strategy is literally to have like a Coke within arm's reach of wherever you are when you're out and about, which is so true, right? It's like pretty much every time you leave your house, you can find Coca-Cola. So for me, I guess a little bit different than you, but you eventually came to it I would almost equate it to like just a light switch turning on and just saying, I am eating these foods and I'm not going to fall for the bullshit anymore. Yeah. Because if I continue to fall for this bullshit, I will either be dead or I will be on medication for the rest of my life. So these are foods, and then anything that's in a box or a package or with an ingredient label is no longer food. It might taste really good, but nothing is going to taste better than what having this ultimate quality of health is. And one of the things that you'd mentioned was like this, maybe the difference in severity. But my counter to that is like, for someone like you, right, there are thousands and thousands of people that come to you for knowledge and information. And so for you, when you were dealing with that autoimmune issue, maybe you were operating at 50% of your potential max. For sure. It's like, dude, what is the world missing out on by Robert not being at 100%? And equate that to all these other people thinking that 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. Yeah. Like, what are like the contributions or the businesses or like the life's missions that aren't even getting turned into existence because you're just in this like metabolic fog that's just crippling your life? Dude, 100%. And it's to know what it's like to live in that sort of foggy, low vitality zone to where I am today. Like, I wake up, I feel great, and it's night and day, right? It's like it's the difference between struggling to survive the day and really like thriving every day. And man, it's so easy to take it for granted, because like, I mean, this happened to you when you were pretty young, but in my 20s, my early 20s especially, I was just in really good health. Yes. And you just take that for granted, right? You think that's the norm until all of a sudden it's not there, and then you're kind of desperately trying to get it back. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know, for people that you're trying to, it's weird because I would never wish to go through what you went through, but in a way it seems like maybe it was kind of good for you because you had this very clear, like, if I don't eat this diet, I'm going to be on drugs and or dead. Yes. Right? Like, you had a very bright line. Mine was much softer. It was like, they're like, oh, you're fine. The doctors tell me I'm fine, but I know I feel like shit. So I never had that in my mind where like, if I don't eat this diet, I'm going to die or be on drugs. It was just like, I'm trying to feel good. Yes. So every time I would start to feel better, I went like at war with my own psychology in a way. Like, I start to feel better, and then your body just wants even just fruit. There was a while I couldn't eat even fruit. And so I was like, oh, it's okay. I feel better. You just eat some fruit now. And then you feel like shit again. And so it's been, I don't know, learning how to control yourself
Did you ever do any long-term fasting? Because I think that was a big breakthrough for me too. When I started doing extended fast where I would just drink water, I felt like I started to develop a very high level view of this whole process of myself, like eating really good and starting to feel better and then eating worse again. I was able to like delaminate myself from my own desires and my own hunger. And that helped me get a hold of myself, not just in my eating, but in really multiple areas of life. Did you ever do any long-term fasting?
That's a good question. I would say that when I was sick, I wasn't doing anything outside of a range of like maybe 16 to 18 hours max, where I would have 1 to 2 meals a day. And I actually did a 90-hour fast about a month ago. And that was the longest fast that I've ever done. And to your point, I went through these oscillations, especially in the beginning, of just like craving food so badly. And then whenever I would feel that craving, I'm in Austin, Texas. It was like 75 degrees when I was doing it. I would go out in the sun and just take a really long walk. And the feelings that I had around food, cravings, it's hard to, you know what I'm saying? It's like you experience these feelings on a spiritual level, and the thoughts that I'd experienced had never been so crisp in my entire life. Even just about like my business or the trajectory of my life, just from detaching myself from food for a period of time. It's like, I think it's an experience that everyone should experiment with.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's a great way to get a hold of yourself.
Definitely.
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these 3 numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney.
We want you to join us for 2 days of discussions and debate, which is all happening at the inaugural Dissident Dialogues 2024.
This incredible event will take place in Brooklyn on May the 3rd and 4th. You'll be joining leading thinkers such as Richard Dawkins, Steven Pinker, Ayaan Ali, John McWhorter, Aisha Akambi, Michael Schellenberger, Mary Harrington, Chris Williamson, Winston Marshall, Konstantin Kisin, Francis Foster, and more.
Hang on a second, since when have you ever been a serious thinker?
I love thinking. It's my favourite hobby. Sometimes, of an evening, it's all I do. Think.
Moving swiftly on, we want you to join us for a gathering where everyone is part of the conversation. Conservatives, progressives, atheists, theists, left, right, and everything in between.
Dissident Dialogues presents a rare opportunity to immerse yourself in a conversation with the most influential thinkers of our time.
We'll tackle important topics relating to religion, science, politics, and culture. If you're driven by intellectual honesty, curiosity, and a desire for the truth, Dissident Dialogues is the place for you.
It's not just an event, it's the beginning of an intellectual journey, and we want you to come along for the ride. I like rides.
Dissident Dialogues is a place for dangerous ideas. Buy your tickets now at dissidentdialogues.org and be part of the conversation.
So you said you started to go deeper. You heard Sean Baker's podcast.
Yes.
You started to heal yourself. You started going deeper into the carnivory rabbit hole. Is that what took you into regenerative agriculture? And then could you let's talk about that. I don't think many people know what regenerative ag is. So like, what is that, and in what ways is it better, not just for people, but also for the world?
Definitely. No, it's a great question. And to clarify, so when I was probably close to about the extensive 2 years that I was doing it, I was just shopping at the outer aisle of the grocery store because I didn't know much. maybe I'd heard the term regenerative agriculture. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know the difference between grain finished versus grass finished. I was just like trusting the right macronutrient combinations that I thought that I should have been eating, and just kind of rewiring my relationship with food in general. And I think that's like the critical first step. I think there's so much information out there in a way that it's almost confusing for people. We were just having this conversation. You and I were both saying like, we actually just enjoy grain finished meat.
Oh yeah.
And that's actually a beautiful thing, and it's really good for you.
Yeah.
But then you have people that are out there that are saying, hey, if it's not grass finished, if it's not regenerative, don't eat it.
Yeah.
Which I don't agree with at all, which we'll get into it. But so I rewire my relationship with food. I feel really good. And then I start to learn a little bit more about regenerative agriculture and local ranching. And so basically regenerative agriculture just means that you are basically farming and ranching in harmony with nature. It's kind of a beautiful thing that we've done as humans, is we've basically deharmonized like every aspect of our lives about fundamentally what it means to be human. And I think ranching is a perfect example of that, where we think of these massive industrial farms where the cattle are stuck in these really tight pens where they're shitting on top of each other, and we're spraying all of our crops with glyphosate and pesticides, and we're monocropping all these fields. Regenerative agriculture just means that we're going to get rid of all of that, and we're kind of basically let God be the ultimate rancher and the ultimate architect.
Right.
So when you go out to a regenerative ranch, there's no tilling, there's no spraying. You'll see cattle in one part of the pasture, you'll see pigs in another, you'll see chickens in another, you'll have rows of different crops and things like that. And the cattle are basically getting rotationally grazed, which means that they're getting moved to different parts of the rancher's land, and they're pooping on the land, which is like amazing natural fertilizer. And by allowing nature to kind of take its course and allow these animals to almost have like, it's almost, I think Joel Salatin, who's a really well-known regenerative rancher, he called it like choreography, where you're just moving all these animals around.
Yeah.
It's really able to like pump these nutrients into the land. And you see this amazing uptick in like these thousands of different indigenous species. You see the actual density of the soil is so thick.
Right.
Like when we were out in Will Harris's ranch at White Oak Pastures, if he scoops a shovel into his soil, it looks like chocolate cake.
Yeah.
Where if you go to this like industrial farm that's like monocropping one single type of vegetable, it's like this like dull gray soil.
Right.
Versus like the chocolate cake of regenerative agriculture. So that's a huge misconception around meat, man, is that, you know, meat is terrible for the environment. And it's like, number one, even with industrial agriculture, it's a fraction of the emissions of like the transportation and energy industries. But to counter that, through these regenerative practices, you can actually improve the number of species on farmland, and you can also improve the actual carbon that's being sequestered and stored into the soil too.
Right.
So it's actually like one of the best things that you can be doing for the environment.
Yeah, it's like one of the only carbon negative activities, right?
Yes.
That you're actually pulling carbon out of the atmosphere if it's done correctly. And yeah, it's really it's the old way of doing agriculture, basically. It reminds me of that quote that nature to be commanded must be obeyed. You know, you're actually aligning yourself with the patterns of nature rather than trying to dominate and control nature, which industrial ag seems to be more in line with.
Yeah.
We visited, actually, my girlfriend and I, a couple of weeks ago, the farm at Okefenokee in South Georgia, and they do regenerative ag as well. And it was interesting to see how, like, exactly what you said, the choreography, right? You have the cows grazing here for one period, then the cows are moved to a different place to graze, you know, the new growth there, and then maybe they rotate the pigs in to eat the roots or whatever. I think there was like a thorny blackberry species or something they were trying to get rid of, and so they let the pigs do that versus using herbicides or whatever the industrial approach would be. And it was just a lot of choreography is a great word for it, right? You had people that were hands-on, paying attention, what animals need to be where. How do you bring these animals into the word synergy, I guess, or what's symbiosis would be maybe the biology term, where, you know, an animal's doing one thing to prepare the land for maybe another animal to rotate in behind it. And then the outcome of that was just amazing, right? They didn't use any pesticides, no chemicals. all the animals were bred. Actually, they're not doing any insemination, right? They're actually breeding the animals. It was all heirloom varieties of the plants. And the food tasted amazing. It's good for the environment. The community that grew up around that was it's just great. It's just like the way things used to be. It's like the good old days.
Definitely.
What is it? Why are you seeing regenerative ag make a comeback? Are we rediscovering that we maybe screwed something up going into industrial ag, and now you're seeing people lean the other direction? Like, how do you see that unfolding?
Yeah, it's another amazing connection point between Bitcoin and just the food system. Is like, maybe there was actually a possibility that we had things figured out correctly a couple hundred years ago.
Right.
And maybe the last 50 to 100 years we really F things up in the wrong direction. I mean, 100 years ago, regenerative agriculture wasn't even a term, because this is just what it was just agriculture. And it's what everyone was doing. Like back in the day, contrast it to now, there's 4 multinational beef packers that control 85% of any piece of meat that you see at the grocery store.
Right.
Back in the day, it was so localized that it was really one processor per county, and maybe even per town too, depending on where you were. Maybe if you were in like Texas or Georgia, or more of like an agrarian culture. And we've really gone in the opposite direction of what we had figured out about 100 years ago. And now I think we're starting to see this resurgence where people are distrusting these large national nutrition boards that are telling us, hey, I should eat 8 to 11 servings of carbohydrates, bread, pasta, sugar every single day. I should avoid saturated fat. They're experimenting. They're learning from stories like yours, learning from stories like mine. They're eating these foods and they're feeling really good. And then they're taking it a step further where they're like, I actually want to go meet the dude or the woman that's growing my food. And I want to shake their hand and be on a first name basis with them in a relationship. Yeah. And it's such a pure transaction, right? Where it's like, if Rob's the rancher and I'm the consumer, I'm giving you my hard-earned dollars, and you're going through this energy intensive process of like raising cattle on grass and maybe finishing them on grain and giving them a very, like the best, purest type of death that I could possibly have, and then butchering it and processing the animal and then giving that to me in exchange for my hard-earned money. That's what life is about, right? Yeah. It's like a spiritual transaction in a sense. And I think people are like, they want to be gone are the days of just going to a grocery store and not even thinking about where their food comes from, right? Now, the legality is so crazy. There was something that we used to have called the COOL Act, which was the country of origin labeling law. And it used to force you to disclose where the beef was coming from. So if something was raised, slaughtered, and then processed in Brazil, you used to have to put that on the label. Now, as long as the product is just packaged in the US, it could be labeled as a product of the USA when the animal was raised, slaughtered, killed in Brazil, and just like packaged in plastic in the US. And then Whole Foods, right? Since they got bought by Amazon, they're labeling a lot of this beef as like local pasture raised beef, which can mean anything. And me, I'm like, oh great, I'm in Austin, Texas. This cow must have been raised like 20 miles outside of here. Nope, it's actually like a Brazilian animal that was grain fed its entirety of its life.
No idea.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It's crazy.
And then is that what's wrong? Okay, I guess that happens because the lobbyists capture the regulatory agency.
Yes.
And then they get those laws changed so that there's less transparency.
That's exactly what it is. And
what's wrong with the food system? Is that we've had this regulatory capture, and now it's so interesting. Like you say, shake the rancher's hand.
Yeah.
What is it about that? Is it just maintaining this sort of human to human connection so that people are more likely to not, I don't know, pump the animal full of drugs or do anything else that would harm their customer when they see their customer face to face? Is that the spirit of shaking the rancher's hand?
Yeah, I think it's the spirit of peer-to-peer transaction. And I think it's also what you said of actually being able to verify where your meat comes from, ask questions like, do you vaccinate? Do you finish your animal on grain? What is the lineage of the cow? How long ago were they butchered and processed? When you pick that meat up at the grocery store, there's really no way to verify, right? It's like, I do this all the time in Texas. I just go ask butchers questions just to see how on their game they are. And 9 out of 10 times they have no idea what farm it's coming from. They might be able to tell you the state, but very rarely can they even tell you the farm, versus like actually knowing your rancher and being able to ask those questions. And the rancher has such a small set of customers compared to a grocery store, where if I'm a rancher and I'm selling beef to you, I know it has to be good quality and I have to nourish you, because if it's not good quality, you're just not going to come back to me and I'm going to be out of business.
Yeah.
So it's like that peer-to-peer transaction is just such a pure thing that we've really lost sight of, but I think we can win it back.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of this idea of governance being local too, that when your government is a localized affair and you can participate in the political process, and you've probably, whoever the governors are, whoever the politicians are, actually see the people face to face, they're much more likely to engage in kind of a harmonious governance structure. Whereas if you have a more centralized government, if all of the decisions are coming out of Washington, D.C., for instance, well, then you've got 330 million people under one giant umbrella.
Definitely.
Where you're not getting this face-to-face empathic interaction. Everyone's just a row on the spreadsheet, right? Like it becomes much more industrialized, right? It's like industrialized governance. And it sounds like that's what we've done to our food in a way. We've just, I guess to scale it, you've kind of broken that human connection, and that we didn't realize how much value, like in the pursuit of efficiency, I guess, we've lost something.
Yeah.
Right. But the thing that we've lost is pretty easy to get back, because it's the way we always did it. It's just localized, decentralized food production, peer-to-peer transactions.
Yeah.
And so it's just a matter of doing it, I guess, right?
Yes.
It's not like a mystery we need to solve. We just need to go back to the old ways.
Yes. It's like we could probably have a 4-hour podcast talking through the history and the nuance of how we got here, which is extremely complicated.
No.
But like you said, the answer is very simple, where it's like buying real foods, which are animal products that are made by God, and seeking out a relationship with your rancher, and just eating those foods and saying no to all the fiat processed garbage that's found in the inner aisle of the grocery store. Like you said earlier, that's basically masterfully combining these subsidized products of corn, wheat, soy, vegetable oil, processed sugar, and just watch what happens to your health. And you articulated something that I've thought about, but I've never been able to articulate it. You basically implied that the more energy that we give, like the more energy that a rancher gives to their process, the more energy that we expend in terms of finding the right rancher, cooking our meals, nourishing our bodies, our family's bodies, that almost like that seeking of energy is what gives you energy, versus the conservation of energy is actually destroying your energy and your metabolic health too.
Yeah. So efficiency has a cost, right?
Yes.
Efficiency is like the pursuit of cost savings, but there's a qualitative cost that comes with the pursuit of quantitative cost savings, perhaps.
Definitely.
And that is that sort of spiritual peer-to-peer shaking the rancher's hand thing that we've lost.
Yes.
How do you deal with, I'm sure you get a lot of, you run the Meat Mafia podcast. You've probably had some criticism from vegans or vegetarians, maybe, I don't know. How do you deal, well, I guess the one argument that I hear because I talk about being a meat eater is people typically want to wield the ethical argument and say, it's wrong to eat animals. Animals should be free or whatever. How do you deal with that criticism, and how do you handle that argument?
Yeah, it's another good question. There's really no counter argument to someone that's just ethically convinced that killing animals is wrong. The only thing that I can do is just hope that at some point they wake up to realize, oh, when I'm following this vegan diet and I'm so nutrient deficient, I don't feel good. Right. And I hope that they can maybe bridge that gap by finding a good regenerative farm. I think Force of Nature does a great job of that. They're probably the largest regenerative D2C meat shipping company. So you do see a lot of vegan crossover. The way that I justify it is that basically every single species kills other animals for food. And neither you nor I nor the listener wants an animal to die. When you see these cattle, when you see these chickens, these pigs, they're like beautiful, amazing, majestic creatures. It's like neither of us want them to die. But at the end of the day, like their nourishment is what we're evolutionarily designed to eat. Yeah. And when you go out to a ranch, you realize that not only is that death going to potentially nourish you and your family for an entire year plus if you're buying a whole cow, but the carcass of that animal is able to like make life for all these other species. It's like this beautiful cyclical loop in a lot of different ways too.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that I've justified it. It's like, these are the foods that I've designed to eat. Death really is a part of life too. And if you actually go out to a ranch, you realize that when the farmer is doing things right, these animals truly have an amazing life up until that last day.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And I mean, everything that lives must die.
Yeah.
Right. And I love this meme that I saw on Twitter where it shows like a deer in a hospital bed in a hospital gown surrounded by family. And it said, this is how vegans think deer die in nature. You know,
Dude.
it's if it's done correctly, as you said, like these animals lead a full life, they're treated well, and then they are killed in a very quick and painless way.
Yeah.
Right. And then they are harvested for our consumption. And it's not, you could always make that you're right, that the ethical argument, if you just think it's wrong to kill animals, well, then there's nothing that anyone can say to that. But the reality of the universe is that life feeds on life, and humans have been at the top of the food chain for a really long time. So
yes,
you don't have to participate in that, but I think if you refuse to participate in that, you'll soon see in your own metabolic condition that there's a reason we're at the top of the food chain.
Definitely.
And of course, it's different for everyone. Every ethnicity and every person has different dietary things that work for them and things that don't work for them. But in general, it seems like animal foods are much more nutrient dense and nourishing for humans in general than just a purely plant-based diet. And man, we've seen a lot of people, like I bought it too, right? When I was having health conditions, the digestive stuff, I was living in LA at the time.
Yes.
Veganism. Everyone's pounding the drum. That'll fix your gut. It'll heal everything. I checked it. I was Googling the other day too. It was something about, well, I forgot what it was, but it was like, I ended up Googling like, oh, what is the right diet for gut health? And the first result on Google is like, oh, plant-based foods. It's all like, how did we get there? Is this like, how did we, as the animal that has been eating animals for millions of years, right? If you actually go into Homo sapiens and the end, like everything that we come from, we've been eating meat and animal products for literally millions of years. How do we get into this modern age where we've all of a sudden decided that plants are the answer? And how do we awaken people from that illusion that's not, I don't know. I don't even know where the evidence comes from. So like, how did we get here and how do we fix it?
Yeah. There's almost this conspiratorial side of our brains where you're like, do the elites at the top fundamentally understand that animal products are like the mechanism where the lights go on and it gives you that amazing metabolic health where you're more likely to be a free thinker and not want to be like this domesticated cat that just submits to everything that they're saying. Right. I think there's that's a great argument to make. Or is it just a matter of flawed science? I mean, if we want to talk about the flawed science, I think the Dwight Eisenhower story it's popularized on Twitter now, but I think that's a great story where in 1951, President Dwight Eisenhower had a heart attack. And so he was out of the Oval Office for about a week. The stock market took a massive dump and people were terrified because you saw heart disease in men skyrocket. Meanwhile, the average male was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. I think Eisenhower was smoking like 2 packs a day. And there was this scientist out of the University of Minnesota. His name was Dr. Ansel Keys. And he was convinced that increased saturated fat consumption was the leading cause in heart disease in middle-aged males at the time. And so there's a great documentary that digs into this called Fat Fiction. It's free on YouTube. It's an hour. It's incredible to understand all the information. But Ansel Keys put together the 7-country study, the famous 7-country study, where on the x-axis, I think it's levels of saturated fat consumption. And then the y-axis is like incidence of heart disease or heart attack, something like that. And so he studies these 7 countries. And so when you look at it on a graph, it's like a beautiful linear correlation. So the average person is like, oh my God, I need to stop eating saturated fat. Otherwise I'm going to have heart disease or a heart attack. What people don't know is that there were actually 22 countries that he studied. And so when you plot out all the 22 countries, you see a very loose correlation, but not anything close to the linear connection that was popularized as a part of that study. And so Ansel Keys had an incredibly bombastic, debative personality. He was able to get himself on the board of the American Heart Association. American Heart Association receives a $1.7 million donation from Procter & Gamble, the original creator of Crisco, the first vegetable oil ever. And then you start to see this this demonization of saturated fat trickle its way down into our dietary guidelines. And so 1980 are the first government recommended dietary guidelines that we've ever seen. And that's when we see like the recommendations to avoid saturated fat consumption and replace that with like a high carbohydrate, high sugar diet of 8 to 11 servings of carbohydrates every single day, which is crazy. So, and there's so many other stories that are similar in that lens. And I remember thinking to myself, like, are the dietary guidelines really based off of these like flawed hypotheses? And the more research I've done, my answer to that is yes.
Wow. The Crisco, that is seed oils, basically,
yes,
right? Like
it's seed oil. Yeah.
So are those subsidized then? Like it's like soybean oil, canola oil. Are those subsidized crops?
Yeah, because they're coming from soybeans and rapeseeds and everything like that. And the fascinating thing about Procter and Gamble and Crisco is that before the Industrial Revolution, I believe it was cottonseed that was used as like the premier lighter fluid. Yeah. And then during the Industrial Revolution, petroleum oil replaces that.
Right.
So these companies are like, I need a new use case for cottonseed oil. And so they found out that if you took it through this 15-step process of bleaching it, deodorizing it, making it, like heating it to a certain temperature, when it's solidified, it kind of looked like lard at the time, which most people were cooking with. Yeah. And then they spin up some nice, beautiful branding and the demonization of saturated fat. And it's like, oh, beautiful. So these vegetable oils are heart healthy, which my caveat to that is that it has been shown that the more vegetable oils you'll eat, it can bring your LDL level on. Yeah. But like the boogeyman of LDL is so interesting because if we look at all these metrics of your metabolic health, your waist size is actually your biggest determinant of how healthy you are. So I see all these guys that are 55, et cetera, that are so worried about their LDL. And I'm like, dude, you're 60 pounds overweight. Right. Like you're so predisposed to heart disease, all these other chronic diseases just because you're solving for LDL.
Yeah. And that's because mainstream medicine has impressed that upon them, right?
Yes.
That you have to take whatever you need to do diet or medication wise to get your LDL at a certain level.
Yes.
But if you're actually eating a carnivore diet, I think what may take your LDL out of range to some extent, but it's not actually, it doesn't seem to actually matter. Like people that actually adhere to this diet over long periods of time, I mean, they're in great shape. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. I saw, was it you that posted the photo of the 82-year-old woman on the ranch that's been eating she'd been eating the carnivore diet for 40 years and she's 82. She looks like she's 50.
Dude, so I didn't post that. I saw that picture. That is, you know what I'll tell you is that I've met so many wives of ranchers that have been out on the ranch for 30, 40 years that have been eating beef tallow, ribeye, all these animal products, no makeup on their faces. They look 30 years younger than what they really are. And they're just like naturally beautiful. And I'm like, what if beef is like the ultimate health hack or makeup product for women?
So true. Wow.
Yeah.
So going on this journey, you've met some resistance or criticism, I imagine, from some of the vegan, vegetarian community. Have you turned a lot of people? Like, have you been able to actually, I assume there's people also tuning into the show that have health conditions.
Yes.
Like that's probably the number one demographic, I would imagine. Have you seen your work actually have impact in people's lives where they've, had a certain health condition, discovered your show, discovered the diet, and been able to make changes?
It's probably the best piece of feedback that I can get. And I get this multiple times a week of people that will say, hey, started following a meat-based diet since I listened to your show. I was on this type of medication. I lost 20 pounds. I'm no longer on those drugs. They'll send me before and after pictures of their skin, a few months difference in between those pictures. I get those messages all the time, which just gives me more confirmation of the things that you and I are talking about are what more people really need to heal. And my metric for the way the tide is moving is based on my friend group back in New Jersey and New York, just because that's where you're most likely to see that plant-based demographic or these coastal elite cities. And I used to, in 2019, when I first went carnivore, I would post pictures of my meals and so many people would be like, dude, you're literally going to die. Like you're going to get like heart disease, like the craziest messages. Meanwhile, the people that are sending it to me are like 30 pounds overweight, which is ironic. And now those same people are like, hey, Brett, can you show me a good regenerative ranch in New Jersey that I can buy beef from? Like so many of those people, I remember the commentary from 2019 versus now, which is my connection point of like, we can turn the tide and we can win this thing.
Yes. This, I think too, in my mind, is the bright side of social media. That because still seed oils today, for instance, like they're everywhere. They're not talked about as being bad for you in any mainstream medical anything, not on the news, but in social media, you can sort of figure it out, right? That people have, I don't even want to say proven that seed oils are bad, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. There are studies and things. So the bright side of social media in my mind is that people are able to triangulate onto these inconvenient truths, let's say, for certain mainstream medical complexes or industrial ag or whatever the large centralized power or institution may be. Social media lets people kind of peer-to-peer zero in on what's actually true. And then those ideas can spread really quickly. You've seen like the success of like Paul Saladino and Sean Baker, who you mentioned earlier. They've just grown like wildfire on social media because what they're saying actually works for a lot of people. Whereas pre-social media, it would have been very difficult to get those ideas to spread as easily as they do. Do you think then that could we actually overturn this thing and move from a world that's dominated, at least I'm talking about the US here, clearly, dominated by industrial ag? Could we see a reversion back to traditional or regenerative agriculture thanks to, in part, social media?
I think you nailed it on the social media piece. And I think partially why I was so interested in what Sean was talking about was the Western medicinal, that model is my doctor is God.
Yeah.
If he tells me to take this antibiotic, this medication, this food, I do it. If he doesn't tell me it, I don't do it at all.
Yeah.
Where it's these guys like Sean and Paul Saladino and even Dr. Mary with you and me, they're almost like a consultant that's giving you hope in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm going to bet on the person that's hopeful and telling me that I can heal.
Yeah.
And the other beautiful thing about social media is that it allows you to lean into the power of anecdote.
Yeah.
Where Western medicine says, oh, Brett, you had ulcerative colitis, you healed from carnivore. That's just an anecdote. There could have been all these other factors.
Yeah.
Where someone that's struggling with UC is saying, okay, it worked for this guy.
Yeah.
He could heal. Maybe I can heal too.
Exactly.
And then he experiments with it. And obviously we'll continue to see that these are ultimately the food groups that we're just evolutionarily designed to eat.
Yeah.
And so I think that what I'm encouraged by is that I think there's a stronger connection between vegans and carnivores that we actually realized, where even when you were vegan in LA, you were still trying to do the right thing. You just didn't have the right tools and the right information.
Yeah. Bingo.
And then as soon as you had the right information, your health drastically transformed.
Yes.
I hear people all the time that listen to the show that were formerly plant-based, that were formerly vegetarian. They watch Game Changers, which was funded by James Cameron, that has like the largest, he has controlling equity in like the largest pea protein company in the US, by the way. And Arnold is also invested in that too.
And Game Changers is the documentary with all these athletes saying plant-based food is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Arnold is on there saying, oh, I don't need meat. When these golden era bodybuilders that look the best were basically carnivore and low carb, which is so wild.
Yeah.
And here he is saying that you don't need meat.
Yeah.
And he's invested in all those same brands as well.
Right.
So I think that the thing that was so powerful for you and me is that there's almost this disparity between how crappy you feel and how good you felt when you ate those animal products that made you realize this is the level of potential I can tap into. I'm never going back.
Yes.
That's why like my curse was really a blessing because I had that disparity. Most people are at this just consistent metabolic low where if you can convince them to experiment with this and they understand how good they can feel, there's no going back, right?
Yeah.
Everyone that's experimented with this knows that there's really no going back.
Yeah.
So as long as we can just spread the right information and have conversations like this, I think most people are intuitive enough to realize like, okay, the science says this actually is science. Like this is the ultimate science that we're supposed to be eating animal products and it's good for the environment and it's beneficial to the rancher and the overall community. And that's the process that we should believe in. So it's not going to be easy. Maybe we can't win, but I've seen enough examples of people changing their lives and spending thousands of dollars with their local rancher and investing in chest freezers that were formerly just eating processed foods 2 years ago, not thinking at all about where their food came from, that why can't we replicate this thing at scale?
Yeah, it's definitely hopeful. And it seems like it's going the right direction overall. Yeah. And the other thing I really enjoy or appreciate about people like Paul and Sean, Dr. Mary, is that instead of speaking from a position of authority, like a lot of mainstream medicine doctors tend to do, like, oh, this, do this, your LDL's high, take this. They are, as you said, much more consultative, right? And so in addition to through social media, I got this permission to engage in the carnivore diet. Like, oh, I'm not going to die if I eat protein, which there was something there for me. It's like, well, steak's always been my favorite food. In a way, I should have trusted myself.
Yes.
Yet I didn't, I don't know. Like you just didn't know, right? You think, oh, that doesn't mean anything, but that does mean something, actually. It's like when these people act as a consultant to you, you learn that the real arbiter of your health is how you feel, right? Like you are your own doctor in that sense. Like your interior experience of yourself is the actual metric you should be optimizing for, not the doctor telling you to get the LDL right or whatever the thing may be. I'm not trying to dispense with all of that.
No.
But at the end of the day, it's like, what is health?
Yes.
It's vitality. How do you feel? How do you show up in the world? How much energy do you have? What is your attitude like? And there's a humility that has to come with that, right? Like, even if you're the doctor, you can't just say, this is what you have to do. It's like, well, here are some things that might work for you. Here are some tools, but ultimately you have to try these tools and see what works for you. And so I hope that more people will take responsibility for themselves and their own health and take that seriously. Cause that took me a long time too. It's like to really accept the reality that it's up to me, basically. It's like, how do I actually feel as a result of this? It's not, there is no final answer out there, right? There's no one size fits all for this. It's like you are in this biological experience of being alive. And then as you get older, you know, if you're lucky, there's going to be a puzzle, right? You're going to have some issues, probably of some kind. Like, knock on wood, maybe you're lucky and you won't have them for a long, long time. But at some point, you're going to have some issues, right? This is part of aging and living and dying and all the things. And so to take responsibility as an active participant in that process, rather than trying to, again, give the responsibility to someone else, like just tell me what to do, that's the lesson. Like, that's where the meaning of this whole thing, I think, comes out. It's like, when I look at this health experience I've been on for 9 years, it's like, what is my lesson? What is my lesson? My lesson was self-responsibility, right? That I'm the final judge of how this thing works.
Yes.
So how do we, in a world that people have been so conditioned to just trust the experts and trust the science and all of this other nonsense, how can we motivate people to take charge of their own health and be responsible for themselves?
I think the response that you gave before you asked that question pretty much nailed it. And it seems so simple, but it's so powerful, where it's like, number one, I think one of the things you did really well is you basically looked yourself in the mirror and you said, do I actually feel good? So if you don't feel good, then there is either inflammation in your body or there's something that's not going right that you need to correct. And then I think, just secondly, if we've been these like obedient citizens where we've listened to the US dietary recommendations to limit our fat and eat processed grains and eat processed sugar, and the statistics are that almost 90% of us are metabolically unhealthy, what we've been taught for the last 50 years is literally not correct.
Yeah.
So if that's what your doctor is teaching you and they act as if they're the overlord of your health, why would I continue to do that?
Yeah.
If I loved my gastroenterologist, he was a great dude, I really liked him. If I listened to what he was telling me and if I didn't literally go to him and say, I want to get off this medication, like give me a colonoscopy because I'm done, I would still be on that drug 3 years later.
Wow.
Right? So I think it's that, like, actually honestly looking yourself in the mirror and asking yourself, do I feel good or not? And being willing to experiment, because what is the worst that's going to happen? Right. I haven't heard of any use cases of people eating more meat where they feel way crappier. I've only ever, in the thousands and thousands of people that I've talked to, I've only ever heard of people getting drastically healthier and getting off of drugs and medication and like the medical merry-go-round that they were currently on.
Yeah. It's like, you don't, especially if you're not healthy already, it's like, what do you have to lose in a way? And look, maybe it doesn't work for some people. I don't know, but I'm same as you. Anyone I know that's actually tried this, it's gone a good direction. Like, maybe they don't end up full carnivore, but you learn that cutting certain of these foods out, you end up in a better place, right? You may learn that certain foods don't work for you. Even if you just do, like, obviously the elimination diet, right? You cut down to kind of bare bones beef and salt, and this add back one thing, two things, three things, and give yourself 24 hours with each new addition to see what works for you and what doesn't. Also the food allergy testing, like all of this stuff, it was like opening up a whole new world once this condition set in. So it's like, that's the silver lining for me.
Yeah. And I think another silver lining that you brought up as well is this, like, taking out this dogmatism of carnivore versus animal-based versus ketovore versus plant-based. Like, I see people on social media that are debating pure meat and salt versus meat with berries and fruit. And it's like, really, that's where we're going to beef with each other, is like over fruit consumption, where we should actually be uniting around like the bureaucracy of these 10 companies that are like quietly controlling the entire food system. It's like, really, you need to unite against this thing.
Yeah.
And our bodies are so unique, where, like you said, for a while it was just beef and salt.
Yeah.
I think we could both thrive on just eating beef and salt. And now you've gotten your body to be more resilient, where you're experimenting with some fruit and some honey and some carbs, and you feel amazing with your workouts and the way you feel. Yeah. But it's because you're curious and you're not dogmatic and you're continuing to tinker and experiment.
Yeah. And I don't think you ever stop changing, right? Like, you're well, you're like a city of microorganisms. And so now that my microbiome has become more healthy, thanks to the beef and salt for a long time, I'm now able to eat these other foods. And I've also been working with a biohacker who I can't leave out of this. Like, I don't know if it was parasite, bacterial, whatever situations I had going on. He's helped me clear out a lot of that with different protocols. And that seemed to be a real turning point. Like I had a lot of food intolerances, but once I clicked on some of these protocols after a few months, I started being able to eat carbs again and other things. And that's been a total game changer.
Yeah.
So there's this, like, you have to, just like you observe out in nature, right? That there's constant Darwinian combat going on all the time, right? Animals are hunting and eating each other. There's one of those theaters of Darwinian combat going on inside of you all the time. Like, I don't fully understand it, but things change. To say the least. So you, in addition to the podcast, you guys have recently started Noble.
Yes.
Which is a supplement company, which I've tried the stuff. It's really good.
Thank you.
I didn't know though. So Jake's Steak brought me some of your protein powder. I didn't even know it was yours at the time. And I've tried it. I made a smoothie with raw milk, frozen berries, and the powder. But you were telling me offline, it's powdered steak.
Yeah, it's basically powdered steak. It's a beef protein isolate.
Okay.
Which is really interesting. So how we started Noble was, like, Harry, my business partner, and I, we always wanted some type of a physical product. We just didn't know what that would look like. And a lot of times, if you listen closely enough, your audience will tell you what they want. So in the 2 years leading up to this, doing Meat Mafia podcast, running the Twitter, we were getting a ton of questions and people asking us about protein powders. And I would always respond and be like, hey, number one, work on a real foods diet first, supplement second. But if you are going to take protein powders, here's what I would recommend. And I remember thinking to myself, there really aren't that many brands that I trust. Even the cleaner brands are still putting a lot of additives and fillers and things that I personally don't really recommend or would want to use. Why not just build our own supplement company that actually embodies all the ingredients that I've used for the last 4 to 5 years to heal? And so the interesting thing about Noble is it's an all-in-one protein powder. So the protein, like you mentioned, it's a beef protein isolate. So you basically take the muscle tissue of the cow and you're able to turn that into a powder. So that's coming from grass-finished cattle in New Zealand, because the quality of cattle in New Zealand versus the US is way higher. So it's 25 grams of beef protein isolate. There's an organs complex in there. So there's liver, heart, spleen, pancreas, bone, and blood. There's collagen protein, so you're getting that really good connective tissue in there. And then there's a little bit of grass-fed colostrum as well, too, the first milk of the mother cow that's got digestive enzymes and immunoglobulins and a bunch of great stuff for your stomach. And so every scoop of Noble that you take has all those ingredients in it. And then the kicker is that it actually tastes really good. So like you throw 2 scoops of chocolate into some raw milk and ice, and it's like an animal-based milkshake, basically.
Yeah. It was, instead of the ice, I use actual frozen blueberries, frozen strawberries, frozen bananas. I think chocolate protein. And I put a little bit of this, just like a mushroom powder that had, lion's mane or whatever.
Nice.
And it just tastes so damn good. It tastes like ice cream.
Tastes like ice cream.
Yeah, so good post-workout.
Dude, and then a scoop of the powder on its own, because it's beef protein isolate, it's a little bit lower calorie. It's only 85 calories, but it's 25 grams of protein, of like bioavailable protein.
Yeah.
Where, like you were saying offline, there are some really good quality whey protein powders, but whey is really like a waste product from the cheese making process. And so they're highly processing it so much that a lot of people are taking it because they want to hit their protein goals. But their stomach is killing them. They're just like shitting the protein powder out. You're not even absorbing those nutrients. It's about the absorbability.
Yeah, I reflect on that actually a lot because I worked at GNC in college.
Did you? I didn't know that.
So I used to pump a lot of supplements, like the pre-workouts, the post-workouts. And I wonder if that contributed to my gut issues too, because I've heard that a lot of these powders can be lower quality, let's say, and they can aggravate, especially when you're taking, like, say, pre-workout on an empty stomach in the morning. Probably not good for your gut lining.
No.
Right?
No.
So, but the idea of having just like powdered steak as a post-workout, it's pretty, especially when it tastes like, it tastes like ice cream. So you put it in milk. So, and
it's a great bridge product where, like, cause there's sometimes, right, where, even as dialed in as I can be, where I'm like, damn, I just want this like delicious dessert. And I'm like, dude, literally just throw some raw milk in or some heavy cream with some Noble chocolate ice. And that gives me that satiety, the sweetness from the stevia. And I just got 30, 40 grams of protein. And now I'm just good for the rest of the night. And I stayed on the path.
Yeah.
And the supplement space is interesting. It's been so fascinating learning CPG and meeting with these different manufacturers and realizing that
is that consumer purchase guidelines?
Consumer packaged goods.
Okay.
So basically anything out of a package or a box.
Okay.
Dude, it is such an unregulated industry. Legally, if one of the ingredients is less than 1% of the formulation, you don't even have to put it on the ingredients label. So there's all these clean products, seemingly clean products that I'm telling you have different types of fillers and binding agents and things like that they don't even have to disclose on the label.
Wow.
So like finding something that you trust with a founder that you trust with the right certifications, the right third-party testing, and something that you just enjoy is huge.
Back to shaking the guy's hand, right? Like hopefully you can just meet the person. And I love like Paul's stuff that he sends me, the Heart and Soil, like the packaging, everything is just very well done. And there's a lot to be said for that, I think, in the supplement space of nice packaging, frankly. Like if it shows up and it's really good packaging, like that gives it this level of credibility for me that I don't see in like if it's hard to get the top off the thing or I'm peeling the the little seal that's under the cap and it doesn't peel right. I'm like, someone didn't put a lot of thought into this.
Definitely.
They didn't put a lot of thought into the packaging. They probably didn't put a lot of thought into the ingredients.
Yes.
And so I really appreciate when someone goes the extra mile to like make the presentation nice, the packaging nice, et cetera.
Yeah. Don't you feel like so much of life it comes down to like, there's so much alpha in these like 1% improvements that no one else is willing to do.
Yeah.
Like I remember even on Twitter, I would like when I was really trying to grow and I had this vision of my head of what the brand could be, I knew a lot of that at the time was going to come from me writing the best threads that I could write. And my natural desire was like, dude, just watch like an hour of Netflix or something and just chill and go to bed. And I'd be like, no, if you actually want to achieve this vision, it comes on the other side of you writing these threads and putting out the best content. And then I would do the work. I would write the thread, it would get 1 million impressions and 10,000 followers. And like the life that I built was on the other side of those little 1% tweaks. And I even see that with Noble, right? Someone sends in a customer response. Instead of me waiting a day to respond it or writing a 2-sentence email, I just send Loom videos to everyone.
Yeah.
Hey, Robert, thank you so much for purchasing. Customers like you are the lifeblood of our business. Oh, you asked me about the ingredients. Here's a list of like the 7 ingredients that are in Noble. Let me know if you have any questions. And like the alpha from customers will be like, dude, this is the best customer experience I've ever had. They'll go and purchase on subscription where you'll take like a customer complaint and you turn them into super fans. And that's what Heart and Soil has done so well. They're based out of Dripping, so they're 20 minutes from where I live.
Yeah.
Paul's amazing, and his team is unbelievable, dude.
Yeah.
They're all like you meet them all. They're all good looking, in amazing shape. They eat an animal-based diet, and they just love what you do. And you can't stop a team that loves what they do.
Yeah, they're diehards, man. They're such good people. Like they sent me a card when my mom passed. They're just like such good people.
Yeah.
Thanks to my friends at Swan Bitcoin for supporting the show. Swan sponsored the Sailor series, and I appreciate their support from the very beginning of the What is Money show, and I'm happy to welcome them back. Swan has grown a lot since then. They've built a full-service, Bitcoin-centric financial services company with several different offerings. With the Swan app, you can set up instant and recurring Bitcoin buys, and with this, you can get started at swan.com/breedlove. Swan also enables clients in the US to hold Bitcoin directly in an IRA account, so you can hold Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged way. Get started at swan.com/IRA. If you're looking to buy more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, check out Swan Private. You'll get concierge support for buy execution, retirement accounts, inheritance and estate planning, and access to exclusive events, research, and other content. Get started at swan.com/private. Swan Institutional provides financial services to institutions, including Bitcoin-backed lending, asset management, principal investments, Bitcoin services for financial advisors, and Bitcoin mining operations. For those new to Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Swan's Welcome to Bitcoin course at swan.com/welcome. So go to swan.com/breedlove today to get started on your Bitcoin buying journey. Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code Breedlove to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code Breedlove.
So you actually segued nicely into the last thing I wanted to ask you about, which was, well, we mentioned a little bit about the bright side of social media, but you've basically leveraged social media to more or less build your dream life. And I guess I kind of have in a way too. I didn't mean to, which is weird, but I had this New Year's resolution when this is end of 2016. And my New Year's resolution was I wanted to be able to make a living from wherever I was living. So basically to work remotely, you know, and at the time that wasn't a very normal thing. Obviously post-COVID, it became more normal. And then I just fell backwards into Twitter and Bitcoin, and, you know, I never aspired to have big social media, but I didn't understand at the time how much of that's an indispensable component to that vision, actually. If you want to be able to earn a living from wherever you are living, I don't really understand how you could do that without leveraging social media these days. How I think this has become maybe more like the modern American dream for young kids is like, how do they crack into this, right? How do I leave? I don't want to go up the traditional corporate hierarchy. I want to break into something in this digital universe and chart my own path, leverage social media, build your dream life. How do you advise young men or women that are aspiring to do that? Like what suggestions would you offer them?
Yeah. I remember when I got rebaptized last year, and I went through a phase of like 5 to 6 years where I kind of turned my back on Christianity. But the one thing I will say is when I turned my back in my early to mid 20s, the one thing I would pray to God about is I would just say, can you please just like show me what is the ultimate thing that I'm supposed to be doing with my life? Like I was in a, well-paying corporate sales job. I enjoyed that more so because I was competent at it and I was competitive. Like I didn't necessarily love sales. I just loved being good at something. And we were talking about that earlier. And you realize looking back that I feel like sometimes almost God is slapping you in the face with what you're supposed to be doing. Where what I was finding was that when I was going carnivore, whenever anyone would ask me about the diet, I would be so passionate about it, where I would stop what I was doing. I would write my friends like a 2 to 10 page like nutrition guide with like their grocery shopping list and meals to follow. It's probably similar to you, like reading Austrian economics and all the other incredible books that you love to read. You just find yourself, you almost can't not do those things.
Exactly, yes.
And so that would be my recommendation is like, find those things that you can't not do and then figure out what is kind of like your unique mechanism to share those gifts to the world. Because I think number one, people always say, oh, why would I start a podcast? It's such a saturated space. That's true. But when you're actually passionate about a particular topic, people gravitate towards your passion.
Yes.
Right. Where I could be listening to a show about a topic that I'm not that interested in, but the host's energy and charisma makes me interested in that topic.
Right.
And then the mechanism for sharing that information is fascinating because there are some people that are amazing writers. There's some people that should be in front of the camera. For me, I just found that I really enjoyed consuming content on Twitter. And I had seen so many threads that when I was ready to start creating some content and sharing my first thread on my healing journey, I had subconsciously seen enough where I knew how to craft a decent thread for my first thread. And then I just got that first win where I think I gained maybe 1,000 followers. And then once you have that dopamine hit, it's the best feeling. And a lot of times you just need that first hit, that first proof of concept that you can actually do something in the space.
Yeah.
Even for me gaining 1,000 followers, that was enough for me to realize what can you do if you really go all in on this.
Yeah.
And now we've built out 3 businesses on the other side of this. We've helped thousands of people get healthier. You know, I really feel like I found God in Christ through this whole experience. I even think that the girl that I'm dating now, she's with me because of the man I've become through this whole journey.
Yeah, of course.
And it's all built on the other side of like finding that unique thing that you can't not do, and then figuring out like what is that mechanism to deliver to the world and get your dopamine hit off of the fact that you're actually creating versus like being concerned about followers and money. For me, I had worked a corporate job for so long. I just wanted to create something, right? It's like as men, we just want to create something.
Yes.
Yes. And when you don't feed that, it feels like you're dying a slow death. And when you do get to experience that, it's amazing. Like I even think about you, you know, I listened to your first podcast the first time I'd ever heard you was 2020. And I could feel your passion and your intentionality. And I was like, this guy's just a radical truth seeker that just wants to disseminate this information to the rest of the world. And that's what kept me coming back for your content. And I think about all the other people that have similar, all my friends in Austin that look up to you and follow your content. It's like, that's all built on the back of the side of you just saying, I'm going to share this to the world. And I just trust that God is going to take care of the rest, but I'm still going to work really, really hard.
Yeah, dude. Well, thank you for saying that. And it, very difficult for me because I'm actually naturally introverted to do this, frankly. But you take that leap and listening to what people want, like you know, as you said earlier, if you listen closely, your audience will tell you what they want, right? Well, my audience, who I had, again, sort of developed organically on Twitter, was telling me they wanted to hear me talk and write and see me write more. So that's what I tried to do. And it has become this whole thing, and it's been incredible. But I loved how you said finding the thing that you can't not do. It reminds me of, there's this great book called The Role of the Individual in History, and he talks about the paradox of freedom, where it's like people naturally desire freedom, right? To have control over their own time, to have a wide set of options in any situation, to have wealth, material comfort, etc. But all that really does is it gives you leisure, right? And what is leisure? Leisure is like, well, you do whatever you want, right? You spend your time how you see fit. He goes, but if you really take that to its ultimate conclusion and you spend it wisely, right, you'll find the thing, right? And in that set of options or in that time, in that leisure, you will discover the thing that you have to do. Basically, like you can't live, like it's just your passion or whatever you want to call it. So there's this paradox of freedom where you get all these options, but you'll end up discovering the one thing that you can't not do. So you kind of become a slave to your passion in a way. But it's, you know, again, it's a paradox. It's like it's a consensual enslavement in a way. Sort of like maybe there's like, it kind of rhymes with marriage in a way. Maybe like if you're dating, you have all these options. Like everyone's like, oh, let me have as many options as possible. Then you meet the girl or the woman that you can't, you know, this is the one. And so that idea is very deep and interesting to me. And it's, I guess for me was, like the reason I was able to overcome my introversion and do this is because I decided, I was like, Bitcoin is so important that this mission matters so much. It's so big. Like I'm just going to do whatever it is, like whatever the market is telling me that I can do to serve this mission, I will do whatever that thing is. It just so happened to be the thing I was like least comfortable with, but that's probably part of the journey too. And your point on podcasting is like, yeah, sure. Super saturated space. Anyone with a camera and a mic can start a podcast. But the unique opportunity is that you, as an individual, right, with your own unique set of experiences and interests and knowledge, you can become a very unique. It's not like maybe you're not the best, a rocket science podcast, right? Maybe you're not the number one rocket scientist on earth, but maybe you're also a guitar player and you're into rebuilding vintage cars, right? So then you like combine these three things. It's like, oh, you're the rocket scientist, guitar playing, you know, vintage car rebuilder. Like you could be that, you could be the best at that on earth. So you get the opportunity to discover the sets of things that you are passionate about. You then get to pursue them and learn about them with enthusiasm. And then there's an opportunity there to become your own unique brand.
Yes.
And like, I didn't know any of this a few years ago, right? I'm just like, just press record and start talking to people. But I've learned that over this journey. And I think, you know, those are things I would hope young people would take to heart. It's like, yeah, you don't have to be bolted into the corporate hierarchy, the traditional path. You can go out on your own. In going out on your own, you're probably going to discover a bunch of different things and options that appear to you. If you're lucky, you'll find the one thing that you can't not do, or the few things, right? And then if you pursue that diligently and you work at it with a heart filled with faith and a head that's clear, then you can really create something unique and valuable for others. And when you create value in the lives of others, that's when you create value in your own life. So, anyways, a bit of a diatribe, but that's what was coming up for me as you said that.
It's a great diatribe. I think what you referenced is what Scott Adams refers to as talent stacking, right? Where if you're trying to be the most popular Bitcoiner, there's only going to be one most popular Bitcoiner. But if you are passionate about Bitcoin and you're a power lifter and you love Austrian economics and you love meat and you worked at this hedge fund and you combine all these experiences, it's like now you have this like really wide pool of why people are attracted and want to listen to you too. Where it's like for me, my sense when you came on the show and even when I listened to your podcast was I got the sense of like this, like Robert, he actually like, he can't do anything besides share these learnings to the world. I was like, my sense was like off camera. I'm like, I know he's reading and researching every single day and he loves it. And he's doing this not from an ego perspective, but purely because he's trying to share these gifts that he's learned with the world. And as because of those gifts, like think about what it's done for me, where that was the catalyst for me to purchase Bitcoin, which is like the best asset that I could possibly own to support future generations of my family. And then multiply that by thousands of other people that you've been able to get down into this rabbit hole and ultimately change their life and their family's life. It's like, it's almost, it almost gives me chills thinking about it because it's so powerful when you lean into social media the right way.
Yeah. Like for me, again, all thanks to Bitcoin. Like, I don't know that I've always loved to read and all of that, but to start to write, to publish my thoughts on Twitter, that was Bitcoin. Like to give me the courage to come on camera and do these things, like that was Bitcoin for me. So, but again, it doesn't have to be Bitcoin.
Yeah.
For me, it was that mission, like that thing that I had to do no matter what, as you said, right? Like the thing that I couldn't not do was serve Bitcoin. I would even tell people, they're like, oh, so what do you do now? You're out of the hedge fund. I'm like, I work for Bitcoin.
Yes.
I work for Bitcoin. Like, what does Bitcoin need? I will do that. And this has become the thing. So, I think if you explore that space, that free space that you can create for yourself by going off the unbeaten path, right? And pioneering your own way, you'll find, or you can find, I won't say you will find, you can find that mission or thing that you can't not do. And that leads to a whole nother life. So,
yeah. And I think when you build up this metabolic machinery and you turn yourself into a man or woman of value, it's almost like a law of nature that I think God will drop that thing in front of your face that you've ultimately created, but God will give that thing to you. And something else that helped me a lot that I actually think you might have unintentionally done with Michael Saylor is I remember feeling so much pressure to record those first podcasts and like, who am I? I don't have anything figured out. But then I had the mindset of, well, what if I'm just the enthusiast, the curious enthusiast that's asking the guest the right questions and then facilitating conversation. And then you do that enough. And then people look at you as the expert, even though you're just viewing yourself as the curious enthusiast. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off of it of like, just focus on creating a show where you're asking really good questions with people that you admire and you'll build a brand just off of that. And you will become an expert as a part of that process.
Absolutely. Another thing that really helped me was something I learned from Jordan Peterson is like, if you want to overcome, I would qualify, I don't know, when I was younger, I guess it felt like social anxiety, like social settings, like big groups. This is why I tried to do public speaking too. It's like, I need to go towards that fear and get better about it. But something Peterson said was, if you ever feel that anxiousness or social anxiety, it's like, just really focus on the person that's talking. Like put all your energy into listening and like it'll go away because literally all of your faculties are tapped into them. You're not going to have any extra bandwidth
Absolutely.
to be like, oh, how do I look? Or how do I feel? It's like you're all in, right? And that has served me really well. I think in the podcast, like I really try to listen, and of course it's difficult, right? Because you're also trying to ask questions and think, so it's a balancing act. But I want to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
So you have mentioned God several times in this conversation. What does God mean to you?
It's a perfect question to put a bow on this conversation. But what I would say, I was raised Catholic. I have two amazing parents that are also Catholic, went to church every single Sunday growing up, kind of fell into westernized college behavior of drinking and womanizing and turning my back on God and having anxiety and honestly just feeling like I was pissing my potential away. And then one of the things you talk about, Carnivory leading me to Bitcoin. I think Carnivory actually led me to God in a sense. And what I mean by that is once I built this baseline of great metabolic health, I felt like I was able to explore things or have faith in things that I maybe would not have had faith in before because I didn't have enough confidence in myself as a man. And one of the things that I was noticing, because I've always just been like attracted towards like male mentorship and people that I can look up to. That's one of the things we were saying in your kitchen earlier is like men just need other men that they can look up to that show them the path. I was finding that the men that I looked up to the most that I was interviewing on the podcast, they were eating the right foods and they almost all had faith, and particularly faith in Christ. And so I then found a great non-denominational Christian church in Austin. And I think the amazing thing about a non-denominational Christian church versus, an Episcopalian church or a Catholic church is those churches are great, but they're very focused on ritual. And I think there's a lot of guilt that's put on the average churchgoer, where what I was finding in a non-denominational Christian church is it was purely focused on your relationship with Christ, where God, the Father, loved you so much that he literally sent like his only begotten son to be able to die for your sin, and understanding what that actually meant, like the sacrifice that Christ went through. And, I've studied a lot of other religions, but my personal perspective is I've found that that's the only religion that's like really rooted in love and relationship. And I just felt really good when I would go to church. And the church that I go to in Austin is this really small church called Thrive. It's only 50 or 60 people. The pastor, Scott, has an unbelievable story of transformation. And he's just another person that's rooted in the truth, where he just views himself purely as the facilitator of your connection to God and is just trying to offer his perspective and his experiences. And he's been humbled so much by life that he doesn't put himself on a pedestal at all. And I think a lot of people that I share my faith with, they almost have this like really negative visceral reaction. And my counter to that is like, that's what they call church hurt, or like, what you experienced, the negative effect that you felt in church or whatever that wasn't actually God. That was a human misinterpretation of God.
Right.
And as soon as I devoted myself to him and started reading more scripture and praying, and one of the things that you mentioned for you is it's Jesus and it's Socrates, and you vet those two individuals with every decision you make. I'm definitely not anywhere close to perfect, but a lot of times I will ask myself, what would Christ do in this situation? Or what would a good Christian man do in this situation? And I don't know if there's anything that's transformed my life more to that. So it's kind of a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's a great answer. And this is something, it's been strange, dude, because I wouldn't even call myself a Christian, right? As I told you in there. And this has only been over the past 4 years that this transformation has occurred for me. I just try to imitate Christ and imitate Socrates. Christ more from a moral, ethical standpoint, like asking, how would Christ address this situation? Like I look at him, and again, I don't even need to get into the theological debates or even the historical debates. Whether he ever lived or not, whether he is God or not, like it almost doesn't matter. It's just the stories that exist are a mythology of archetypal human consciousness. So you could just ask yourself, like, what would this guy do based on the stories I've read about him? That's the only relationship I have. And that's useful, right? That's
Yes.
like a useful technology, if you want to talk about it in a very secular sense, that you can have this relationship with a character and a story, if nothing else, but it's a useful relationship for addressing real situations in real life. And then for Socrates, I look more to emulate him from a rational standpoint, right? He questions everything. The most famous phrase for Socrates is, the only thing I know is I know nothing at all, right? So he had this reverence for the limitations of knowledge. And, you know, there are no final answers, right? There is no totalizing knowledge. Knowledge is a tool that we use to map reality, but the map is never the territory. So if you start to mistake the map for the territory, you can get into very dangerous territories like totalitarianism, right? Where they have the final answer, the final solution. So this idea that Socrates just systematically questioning everything all the time, these two, and now there's less debate about whether or not Socrates ever lived, right? And there's, well, Jesus, I think there's a lot of evidence that he did live, but there's a lot of people that think it's all a fairy tale. But again, I don't think it matters, because at the end of the day, I haven't met either one of them. All I know is like the writings that are about them. And those writings have been very useful for me in my day-to-day enacted existence. So if you just wanted to call it a technology, that's fine with me too. You know? And so yeah, I talk about these ideas on the show just like that. And then as I was sharing with you, it's like you get these strange things where after a podcast, someone's like, oh, thank you that you helped me find Christ. And I'm just like, whoa, I don't feel qualified for that, but thank you. And it's kind of like Bitcoin. Like, I don't want to tell anyone Bitcoin's the answer, right? I mean, obviously I'm a proponent of it, but my real prescription is to just study. It's like, study Bitcoin, read about Christ, read about Socrates, read about Buddhism, read about Taoism, read about Hinduism, read about, Islam, all of these things, and come to your own conclusion. But
Definitely.
But I wouldn't dispense with them like as if they were just adult fairy tales, because that's how I used to look at it. And I'm just here to say that I was wrong.
Yeah.
And if you can't humble yourself enough to say that, you're almost like saying that you know more than the collective intelligence of humanity since the dawn of time, because those stories are still with us since the dawn of time, more or less. They're here for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're not the one that figured it out that, oh, that's all bullshit. It's like, humble yourself a little bit, maybe, and just read them and see what you find. There's a lot of wisdom there. So anyway, I didn't mean to go on a diatribe again, but it's like, there's so much stuff on social media. People are like, I can't believe you're talking about God and Christianity. You're such a whatever. Like, they're making fun of you, or especially in Bitcoin, there's a lot of rational atheism.
Yes.
And it's like, I'm still actually kind of in that camp in a way, but I've come to have a deep humility and reverence for the limitations of knowledge. And if knowledge is limited, then anything we can say or talk about, there's something beyond that. And you could put the word God to that for me. Yeah. It's like just a word for that which is beyond words. I'm not saying it's limited to that, but there it is. That's enough, right? To justify it practically, if you will.
Yeah. You're open enough to realize that you're on this journey. Your thoughts have changed a lot over the last couple of years. And regardless of whether you believe Christ existed or he didn't, just his mere presence in your life has been a huge additive. And so for me, when those rational atheists, I'm like, the hubris to just like definitively say that that God doesn't exist is so wild to me. Just to be able, like, okay, so that this masterful creator just doesn't exist at all.
Yeah, it's hubris. Yeah.
It's extreme hubris. And I would just prefer, like, if we have to go through life some way, I would prefer to have this mindset that there is a loving creator out there that's given me these incredible blessings. Like, I prefer to live a life of faith, just like the faith that we both had that we can heal. That faith is a massive part of the healing journey. And I would prefer to have that too. And one of the other things, when I would speak to people in the nutrition space or the Bitcoin space, I would find that these people, these Bitcoiners knew far more about currency than I did, and I wanted to learn about that. These people in the nutrition space learned a lot more about food. And then with Christians that I was talking to, the interesting thing about that was I found these Christians were a lot happier than I was. So I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, if you're so smart, why are you not happy with your life? So maybe you should learn something.
Yeah, no, it's well said. And to each their own. And I'm just, talking through my journey as I go, and I'm not trying to prescribe anything. I always say above all freedom, right? Like I'm not here to tell you what to do. I don't think anyone should tell anyone what to do. We should share our experiences, and then that's how we individually kind of zero in on that thing we talked about earlier, right? Of all the things we could do, what's the one thing that you can't not do?
Yes.
I'm not here to tell you what you can't not do. That's for you to discover. But I've found value in these stories that I previously wrote off. So, use that if it's helpful or not.
Yes. What is it? What's the Bruce Lee quote of like, pick what's useful, discard what's not, and just ship it into what's uniquely your own, something like that?
Yeah, which is the algorithm of evolution and innovation itself, right? If it works, keep it. If it doesn't, discard it.
Done.
Simple as that.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of our podcast is literally just keep it simple.
Yeah, exactly. Brett, man, this has been a very fun conversation. Thank you for joining me here in Miami. Do you have any final words, or would you like to let people know where they can find you on the internet? Yeah, brother. As I mentioned, obviously very special for me, as I followed you from afar from a long time. And I think, again, another benefit of social media is like you can find people that you used to look up to and turn them into friends when you build something of value. So I would just encourage everyone from that perspective. But yeah, Twitter is probably the best place to get a hold of me. It's at Meat Mafia Brett. Our Instagram is just the Meat Mafia shared page. So that's just at Meat Mafia Media. And then the supplement company, if they are interested in getting some of that nutrient-dense protein powder, is nobleorigins.com. And that's it, man. Awesome, dude. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah.